Right. And more. Okay, okay. Hey. All right. Right. Hello, hello, everybody. So good to see you guys on an early Saturday morning. Wait, is it early? Gosh, it's early to me. It's 11. That's not really early, is it? Oh, my life. All right. Well, we're excited to have wonderful Emily Hall here today to chat with us about the experience of siblings. Oh gosh, man. My son is 11 and a half, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and we have a 4-year-old little girl. And before we had her, I've heard in the community over and over this kind of nebulous sibling challenges, complications, that sort of thing. And not until I've actually, been in it that I can see her world already shaped by our family unit. I can already see her accommodating Dietrich. I can already see her protecting him. And she's 4. All she knows is that his muscles get weak sometimes. So it's such an important part of the family, our siblings. I mean, we are a whole family. And I'm just pumped and excited to pick Emily's brain today and to find out more about the experience and how we can support them. Because, I read once that siblings are the glue that keeps the special needs family together as a unit. And I really thought long and hard about that because my knee jerk was, no, it's the parents, it's the parents. You know what? In many ways, it's the sibs. So, Emily, welcome, welcome. Let's see, you are muted right now. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Sibling Support Project?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lindy. And thanks to family, friends, and Duchenne for having us here today and for really sharing the spotlight and with siblings and focusing on siblings because you're right, siblings definitely play a unique and very important role in their families. Let's see, I have some slides actually that I think can help you know more about me and the Sibling Support Project. Is it okay if I go ahead and share those? All right, let's do it. Okay, I'm gonna make them look pretty. There we go. Do they look pretty now? Oh, you're on mute.
They're amazing, Emily.
Oh,
Absolutely
thanks.
amazing.
Thanks so much. We try. So today we are going to talk about siblings' unique concerns and unique opportunities because I think it's really important to recognize that siblings experience both. I think we tend to think about siblings as being either, really caring and amazing and wonderful and feeling super blessed to have their siblings who, who have Duchenne and who might have some unique unique experiences, or they think, well, siblings, wow, they, have really hard lives and a lot of struggles because of their experiences as a sibling. And, the truth is, it's really kind of both, and we're going to talk about that. So first, a little bit about the Sibling Support Project. We are the first national program in the United States dedicated entirely to supporting millions of siblings of people with developmental health and mental health concerns. We are a proud program of Kindering, which is Washington State's largest neurodevelopmental center. So we're located right outside of Seattle, Washington. And we work with siblings in a few different ways through our books and publications, which some of which you see on the screen there. We are really proud of our publications because they're written not only for siblings, but largely by siblings. Super important to hear sibling voices. We also support siblings directly through our online communities. We have 3 groups that currently live on Facebook. Sib Teen is our group for adolescents. Adolescent siblings. Sib 20 is for siblings in their 20s, and then SibNet is for adult siblings. It's been around, actually. SibNet is our largest and longest standing group. It's pretty much as old as the internet. It started out as a listserv. I'm going to date myself and tell you all that I was on the listserv, okay? So just saying. And all 3 of these communities are really warm, supportive, reflective places where siblings can, first of all, connect with others who might be walking a similar path. And really share information and support. And so they aren't groups specifically for siblings of people with Duchenne, but they are communities for siblings who definitely experience many commonalities as a result of having a sibling who has a developmental health or mental health concern. And then last but not least, what we're probably best known for are Sib Shops. And there are Sib Shops all across the country and in about 20 countries outside of the US. And Sib Shops are super fun opportunities for school-age kids. So your daughter's a little young, Lindy, but when she hits like 7 or 8, send her over. Sib Shops are really great opportunities for kids to meet each other, to play and have fun and be kids. Super important. Especially for all of our little siblings that are like little adults walking around, right? We know siblings tend to take on a lot on their shoulders, and so we want Sib Shops to be a place where they can just come and be kids and have fun. And then also talk about what it's like to have a sibling who is considered to be different by society, right? And what that can look like. So Sib Shops are, I wish I had Sib Shops when I was a kid. I think they're amazing. I should mention, here's some pictures of our Sib Shops. You can see they're really serious and not fun at all, right? Just kidding. Sib Shops are all about fun. And I should mention that I'm also a sibling. I have an older brother. He's 2 years older than I am. And he has an intellectual disability, and he's really at the center of many of my personal and professional decisions. So a lot of the things I talk about, I speak of from personal experience, in addition to everything we know from all of the great research, the ever-growing body of research about siblings, and of course, our experiences supporting siblings directly since the first Sib Shop launched in 1982. Yeah, long time ago. In fact, hey, there's a picture of me and my brother. I had to just throw it in there. There's my brother, Peter. That's a picture of us actually from a long time ago. That was taken in 2010 at the White House because we were lucky enough to go there together and to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was a super fun thing that we did together. That's really the most important thing about this slide in terms of my professional background. I'm a social worker by training, but really having the experiences of being Peter's sister really informs my work so very much. All right, so I want to start by just talking a little bit about why it's so important to support siblings. And then I want to talk about, and I really would love to have as much audience participation as possible when we start to talk about the specific themes that come up when we think about unique concerns and unique opportunities. So I really want to hear from people's direct experience. But first, I kind of want to I want to paint a little picture here. I want to give you a little context for why it's important that we're all here today to think about siblings. Because I will tell you that in my work as director of the Sibling Support Project, a lot of what I do can be considered sibling advocacy, right? Making sure that people understand that when we talk about family support, family-centered services, we are talking about more than parents, right? Because when we think about the traditional definition of family in those family supports that exist all across our fields, we're really probably talking mostly about parent supports. And so a big part of my work is to remind people of the important role that siblings play in their families and to help them understand why it's important to support siblings and really the benefits of doing so, not just for siblings, but really for the whole family, right? Including the person who has the diagnosis. So the first thing I want to share, we know this from the research, that sibling experiences really do parallel parents' experiences. So pretty much anything that we can say about being the parent of a child with Duchenne, we can put ditto marks on for siblings. Siblings share many, if not most, of the same issues as parents, as well as some unique issues of their own, and we're going to talk a lot about those. Yet, again, if we look at the services and supports that are available for parents compared with the services and supports that are available for siblings, it's pretty easy to see who's getting the short end of the stick. So that's the first point I want to share. The second point is that sibling issues are lifespan issues, right? And this is to say that siblings' issues and needs really do evolve and change over the course of the lifespan of the individual and also the family, right? And, even talking about something like Duchenne, which, is a life-limiting illness and which may mean that path and that journey is shorter when we're talking about the lifespan. It's really important to acknowledge that across different stages of development, siblings will experience, just like the person with Duchenne, just like the rest of the family, right? As we all evolve and change, sibling needs do sort of ebb and flow. And so it's important to recognize that the sibling is growing right there alongside the rest of the family. Number 3, siblings spend quantity time. When we look at the research, we see that over the course of the lifespan, and this is true of any sibling, right? Not just siblings of people with Duchenne, not just siblings of people with disabilities, siblings from the general community, over the course of the lifespan, siblings spend a great deal of time together. And this is particularly true at the earliest stages of life, right? So think about like ages maybe 0 to 18. Totally makes sense, right? We're probably living under the same roof. Maybe we're going to the same school. Maybe we're going to the same church or synagogue. We are part of the same community. We have a high level of involvement with our siblings, right? And so we really ask parents and families to think about this, particularly when we think about things like sib shops, which are really, really timely, I think, interventions, because they are available to siblings at a time when family is really your whole life. Like, it's a really big piece of your world and your universe. Number 4, last but not least, siblings spend quality time. And by this, I mean that I'm a big fan of inclusion, first of all, and inclusive classrooms. But no classmate in an inclusive classroom is going to have as big an impact on the social development, right, of a child with Duchenne or any other kind of diagnosis or condition than that child's siblings, right? Our siblings are 24/7 social models, right? So we have a big impact on one another. So I think that these 4 reasons make a pretty compelling argument as to why we really should be thinking about siblings at every turn, and why, when we think about the definition of family support, we need to make sure that siblings are included in that definition and are invited to have a seat at the table that they really, really deserve. So, all right, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Actually, let me go back for a minute. Before, when we started this talk today, I pointed out that siblings, if you spend enough time kind of like talking to siblings and reading sibling research, as I do, you recognize that there are siblings who say, yep, having a sib with Duchenne is like the greatest gift I could ever have. It is, I can see Lindy laughing, and maybe some of you parents out there are saying, really? But yeah, that having this unique experience has fostered in me compassion and tolerance and flexibility and resilience, right? And all of these wonderful traits. That is definitely true of many, many siblings. On the other hand, you have siblings who say, actually, the reason my life is all messed up is because I have a sibling with Duchenne, right? This has not been a great experience. But for the vast majority of siblings, it's not all one or all the other. It's all of the above, right? It's the super jumbo combo on any given day. And we have research, right, that backs this up. In 1991, B.J. Leonard wrote an article called Siblings of Chronically Ill Children. And Leonard writes, siblings of children with chronic health problems are simultaneously vulnerable for psychological problems and precocious development. Precocious development being a positive in this context. In fact, both outcomes may be true for an individual over time. What can be interpreted as inconclusive literature may be an accurate reflection of sibling status. So Leonard's saying, you know what, the sibling experience is kind of a mixed bag, like kind of like life for all of us, right? Fast forward to 2017, a team of researchers from Vanderbilt University, they've done excellent sibling research there over the years. They basically compared research on siblings of people with disabilities with research on siblings in general. And they kind of looked at 4 different life outcomes, like areas of life outcomes. And one of the things they note at the beginning of their article is exactly what Leonard said way back in 1991. There are also other potential outcomes of being a sibling to a brother or sister with disabilities. Some are beneficial, others less so. In many cases, outcomes can be beneficial or challenging at specific times in one's life or for different siblings. So again, we can't come to any conclusion that the sibling experience is one thing or the other, right? It really is a mixed experience. Again, kind of like life for all of us. So I want to start by talking about unique concerns. And this is sort of the part where I would love to have some interaction from the folks who, thank you, DJ, I'm catching up on the chat. Please stay on your soapbox. Oh, don't say that. You will not be happy if I stay on the soapbox for too long. But I really, I want to talk about, we'll start with kind of the concerns. We'll start with the bleaker picture, I guess. And lest you feel that the picture that we paint is a little too bleak, please remember that we're going to flip the switch after this and talk about the good stuff, the silver linings. And of course, I want to be wary of generalizations about siblings or anyone for that matter. The concerns and opportunities that we talk about today are things that occur not for all siblings, but for enough siblings, as we see through the literature and through direct support of siblings, that we notice themes, right? We have themes and trends and patterns. So that's kind of what these things are based on. So I'm gonna actually just do this. Let's look at some of the unique concerns. And I think I'll go through this list, and then I would love to hear from folks in the audience how, if any of these have impacted them and their families and the siblings and their families, or maybe what strikes them as being interesting, surprising, really unique. So I'd love to hear from the audience. So the first concern is the need for information. And this is such a big deal that we actually devote an entire chapter to this topic in our SibShop curriculum. The truth of the matter is that the need for information is one of the biggest ways that the sibling experience really parallels the parent experience. Okay, and maybe Lindy, maybe you can help me out here. I'll just ask, and actually, DJ, I would love to hear from you as well. Where do you both think that where do parents get information from about their child's diagnosis?
Man, I am on the internet all the time. I am bugging other parents. I am listening to parents chat about their own experiences. There's a plethora. There's books, all that good stuff. Doctors, medical professionals. I just chat everybody up.
Love it. DJ, do you have anything to add to that? In terms of, for me, it was just the doctors and MDA Association. Absolutely. Thank you both. You have beautifully illustrated my point that parents have they have access to a lot of information, whether it's through other parents, medical professionals, MDA Association, other professional associations, right? The internet, yes. I always get a little scared when people first say, like, Google, like, yes, let's consider our source, right? Because there's really good stuff on the internet, but there's also, I don't know. If I spend too long on WebMD, I'm convinced that the outlook is not good for me, even if it's just like a common cold. But anyway, so yes, be wary of your source. But yeah, parents have access to professionals and each other. And I'll ask you both this again, Lindy and DJ, where do siblings get information about their brothers and sisters' diagnoses?
I would say for my daughter, it just trickles down from mom and dad, and it's just kind of as questions come up, and it's just a little bit here and a little bit there.
Yep, lots of putting the pieces together. DJ, any thoughts on where siblings get information? Oh, let me scroll down. I would agree, but I would say myself. Interesting. Yeah, like kind of piecing it together, it sounds like, right? Which is very, very common. So yes, um, so the easy answer is if siblings are lucky, they get information from parents. Okay. And most of the time, that exchange of information does not happen. And it's most often for the best and most loving reasons that information exchange doesn't happen, right? We don't want to worry our other kids. We don't want to confuse them, especially if there's, a lot of, sometimes the road to a diagnosis can be long and bumpy. We don't know right away. Sometimes we're confused ourselves about, what's happening as adults. And parents tend to want to protect their other kids and not burden them and not worry them, not confuse them. So it's not for ill-intended reasons, but the impact, right? This is one of those things where it's like intent versus impact. The impact is that the child is still living with this situation, right? The child, a diagnosis does not happen to just one person. It happens to the entire family. And by not talking about it with siblings, that can create a lot of questions, a lot of confusion, and a general sort of nebulous feeling that there's something really wrong, that we can't talk about this, right? It can create even more worry and concern. And so we really encourage parents to talk with their children in age-appropriate language. We've asked kids, how do you want this kind of information, especially school-age kids, and they've said, they don't want a big sit-down birds and bees kind of conversation, right? They want on the way to soccer practice, like, hey, if someone asks you about Duchenne, what are you saying these days, right? And if the answer is sort of, accurate and fine, you can sort of pat the kiddo on the shoulder and send them on their way to soccer practice. And if it needs a little tweaking, you can do that too. But it's these small, casual, ongoing conversations that go such a far way with kids to know that that door is open and that they can always kind of ask questions or and get the information they need. Yes, Lindy, you have a comment.
Yeah. And I would even venture to say that perhaps within the Duchenne community, the parents might be even more hesitant to share information because of that terminal component. And so, they don't want to scare the siblings. They don't want to get them over anxious, et cetera, et cetera. We're also at this time in science, it's crazy, where we are like this close and we're also this close to a cure. And so we really don't know. Parents really don't know, even for ourselves. We're constantly struggling with, how am I supposed to feel? What am I supposed to do? There's not a lot of certainty within this diagnosis and community, except for the fact that in the past, this has always been terminal and will be, but we don't know how long.
Absolutely. And that can be such a hard thing because we all struggle with mortality, right? Like we all struggle with what it will mean to lose that person. And the interesting piece of it is that there is a pretty good chance that siblings are already thinking about this, right? That siblings already acknowledge that this is a possibility after maybe overhearing something or putting pieces together. And so if we add that layer of kind of mystery, right, around it by not talking about it, that can create a lot more concerns and fears. And so, siblings who say they've fared well in this department say that, their parents were honest with them and could honestly say, like, we don't know. We don't know when the time will come, but we know that the time will come. And they say that they were grateful for that because it helped them prepare and it helped them come to terms. And it wasn't just this silent worry that they had by themselves. Like, it was something that they could talk about with their parents. And in being able to talk about it and process it together, I don't want to say process it together because that sounds like a really like clinical therapy kind of term, but in able to kind of like walk that path together, the reassurance of not feeling so alone greatly outweighed the sadness and the reality of it, right? Because at some point that reality is going to happen, right? I mean, and siblings who have gone through this have told us that it was a relief to be able to prepare. It's so interesting too. It reminds me of the work of Barbara Sourkes, Sourkes. I don't know if people are familiar with her. She's done a lot of work sort of writing about, the experiences of terminally ill children and family experiences, and she writes about siblings as well. And one thing that strikes me in her work is the parallels between the sibling experience and the experience of the child with the diagnosis, and the fact that the child knows, right? The child knows that they have a terminal illness and they know what that means, and they're confused about why no one's talking with them about it, right? She wrote a book called Armfuls of Time, which is just a beautiful, it's a beautiful book, and it has, it talks about her work with children and little case studies. And the title comes from a child who said, I just wish I had armfuls of time, knowing that their illness was terminal. And it's just so beautifully articulated. I mean, there's so much beauty within these kiddos, that if we just are brave enough to ask the questions and to open that door, it can become something beautiful that we can share together, right? So that we aren't living this sort of separate nightmare, right? But we are coming together. So anyway, and that book and a number of other resources can be found on our website. But Armfuls of Time is an incredible book. So need for information is a big one. Over identification. just this idea that the child kind of identifies to kind of an extreme extent with their sibling with a diagnosis, whether it's worrying that they too will develop this illness, or that it's kind of like empathy. I think of it as like empathy on steroids, right? It's like really kind of starting to embody, all of the symptoms and struggles of the child who's affected. Oh yeah, Lindy, go for it.
I love that you bring this up, because within our community, it's an X-linked disease, and so a lot of our daughters can be affected, but because of the obstacles with insurance, a lot of times parents aren't allowed to test their daughters until they're 16, 18, 21. And so I can just see how that could inflate and really escalate for the daughters. And then, of course, with the sons, typically it presents itself fairly young. But yeah, if you've got an older boy, once that diagnosis is there, you're like, oh man, is this with our younger ones too? So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important. I mean, it relates back to our first bullet, the need to share information about it. Like, well, you may or may not, like, we don't know yet. And, there will be a time when we can find out. And in the meantime, like, we want you to share your feelings about it and not, feel this worry by yourself. And, but also not always assume the worst either. Like, let's have hope, right? Isolation, this is such a big one. I think that, did you want to say something else about the over-identification, Lindy? Sorry.
I just wanted to read DJ's comment here.
Oh, thank
DJ,
you.
yeah, yeah. He says, I've always worried about my sister. She has still not been tested. I think she's in her 30s, right, DJ? And she does have some heart issues. Yeah,
For
yeah,
sure.
she's in her 30s. And she has a son. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always say like information is power, but like also it's complicated, right? Because depending on what the results of that testing are, it decisions need to be made, and so it's not an easy answer all the time. So but yeah, absolutely, DJ, and you should stay on your sister to stay on her, DJ. Okay, so isolation, this is a big one. I think any parent who, this is like being, initiated into the club that you never wanted to be in, right? And now you're here, you're pretty glad you found this village, I'm sure, right? Because it can feel really isolating and lonely, especially once you first get that diagnosis, right? It's like, you might feel like you're the only family on earth who's struggling with this, because you might not know other families, especially right away. And for siblings, this is really, really, really true, because it's really parents who tend to find their village and their community, and siblings may be sort of along for the ride. And so it's really important to be intentional about making sure that siblings also have opportunities to meet one another. I mean, that's the idea behind sib shops, but it's not only through sib shops that we can do this, right? We need to recognize that siblings feel isolated from peers, from the general community, but also from maybe their sibling, right? Especially depending on, if the sibling maybe uses a different communication method, that can maybe create a sense of distance. Isolation from parents, right? Like not wanting to add to the perceived burden that the parents are already experiencing. So it's like, hey, I'm not going to bring home any news that's not good, right? And so I'm going to compartmentalize all the not so good things, and I'm going to keep them to myself, right? I'm not going to share them with my parents because I don't want to add to the burden. That can feel pretty isolating as well. And then, of course, isolation from the process and from the professionals and from the information, like we talked about in the first bullet. Increased caregiving, and on this one, I'm so curious to hear from other parents. Um, Sometimes we see like these little parents, these little mini parents that come into our sib shops, and they help with things like feeding and maybe changing diapers, or maybe even just keeping different family members company at different points, being kind of the glue that Lindy you talked about at the beginning, right? So this is true of many siblings. We find in the research it's true mostly for sisters, right? Which kind of makes sense, the way that sisters care for aging parents later in life. Sisters tend to take on caregiving responsibilities for siblings. Most often older sisters, as you might imagine. Not to say there aren't brothers who aren't doing some of the heavy lifting. DJ, I see you. I know there are brothers out there helping out. I know, but we find in the research that's like most often in families where there are no sisters. So, where there are no sisters. Resentment. Oh, I feel like we could talk about this till the cows come home. But resentment is a big one because and I think it's really understandable that when family life seems to revolve around one person, and the routines and rituals and rhythm of daily life really sort of are driven by the person who has the diagnosis, it's easy to understand why siblings could become resentful of that. Also, if there are unequal expectations for behaviors, doing chores around the house, and unequal consequences, that can cause a lot of resentment for siblings, right? Who feel like, hey, this is not fair, right? Like, why am I held to these expectations when my sib is not? Lots of resentment. Incidentally, families who tell us that they kind of do okay in this department, the sibs say that their parents did two things. One, that the parents that family life revolves around something other than just the diagnosis, other than the Duchenne's, right? Whether it's music or art, or maybe cheering on a local sports team, or cooking, or maybe being part of a religious community. There's something that brings the family together outside of the disability, outside of the Duchenne, outside of the diagnosis, right? And I'm speaking kind of broadly about disability in general. And then the second thing that siblings say that their parents did well is they, to the greatest extent possible, had equal expectations for all the children in the house and equal consequences, right? So like everyone did something around the house, whether it was, dusting or recycling or sorting through the mail or wiping down the counters, whatever it is, sweeping maybe. Everyone does something around the house. And there are the same consequences for not only expectations for behaviors, but consequences for anyone who doesn't meet those expectations. So for example, no one in our house is going to call each other a jerk, okay? And if you do, we will all be, everybody will get into trouble equally, right? So this is really especially true for kids. For kids, fairness is everything, right? Like my own two children included. Like I always use this example. If I give each of my children a cookie after dinner, you better hope and pray for me that those two cookies are the exact same size, because they're looking at each other's cookies and they're saying, his is bigger, his has more chocolate chips. And I'm like, really? Really? Okay, I get it. Fairness is important, but let's let it go. Okay, we can have no cookies next time. But anyway, enough about my personal cookie sagas. Embarrassment. This is such a big one, especially I think among like tweens and teens, when you just kind of want to be like everyone else, and maybe your sibling looks different, maybe has different kinds of mobility, different needs, maybe draws some unwanted attention, might have some socially unexpected behaviors. These can all be a source of great embarrassment for siblings. And I think it's really hard for parents to see this. But also important to remember, first of all, the developmental nature of embarrassment, right? It's like, I think all of us can remember a time when we were embarrassed to be seen with our family, right? Like I remember being 13, and if my mom dropped me off at the mall, she'd have to drop me off like a mile away from where I was meeting my friends so that like I could just show up like out of thin air, like arrive without any parents, right? Because I didn't want to be poof seen with mom. Sorry, mom, love you. But yeah, so it's like developmentally very very natural that we are embarrassed by our families in general at some point, and also to consider the beauty of a little space, right? Like especially if the embarrassing things or the things that the sibling finds embarrassing can't be changed, to give that sibling a little space, right? So whether it's like, you know, hey, we're all going to go grocery shopping and you can just kind of like be in the next aisle if you need to, right? Or if we're um, all maybe at the mall and there's maybe a tantrum happening or a little breakdown, can the sibling duck into a store and just kind of like wait till the storm passes, right? So, and then finally, and this is probably I think the most important thing to remember about siblings, maybe anyone really, but validation goes such a long way, right? So it's so important, and so empowering when a sibling is saying, god, I'm so embarrassed when he does x, y, or z. So empowering for a parent to say, you know what, when he does x, y, or z, I get embarrassed too. I get it. Because what's worse than feeling embarrassed but then also bad about it, right? Also guilty about it. So um, any comments or questions, Lindy or DJ, before we move on to guilt, the gift that keeps on giving? Such a good segue.
Yeah, actually, I would love to jump in and share how I've heard other parents talking about how they're the sibs. And you know what, Emily, I struggle with this because even just saying siblings makes this human, they're defined by the relationship to the person with the disability. Do you know what I mean? So I've been struggling to even just find a term instead of siblings, but it's just it's the most convenient. So if you have ideas, please let me know. But yeah, I have a friend who has, let's see, they're tween boys. So one is, 12, one is 10. And the younger has Duchenne, and the older one has to stay with him when mom and dad go out or they run to the grocery store. And man, 12 years old just seems, you're already an adult. Like you said, you're walking in, all these little adults coming into the sib shops, and that's tough. That's tough. And unfortunately, because our community does have such a lack of caregiving resources, there are times that a young sibling will know how to care for an individual with Duchenne than a babysitter you just hire down the road. And so there's this incredible burden on the sibling. That's just incredible.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. And then, DJ, we'll get to your comment. I saw your comment in the chat as well, and I don't want to forget it. It's so true that so many siblings are these little helpers, and in many cases derive a lot of gratification and joy and pride from helping, right? Like, I mean, don't we all feel good when we help others? Like, that's the best thing, right? To make us feel good. And at the same time, yeah, it can take its toll, right? And we're going to hear from an adult sibling panel, I think, in a few weeks, and sometimes this comes up that because of the role of being a caregiver as a child, or helping out so much as a child, they kind of learn to put their own needs second, and that kind of sort of like catches up. It catches up to them later in life, in terms of being able to prioritize themselves and take care of themselves and feel that their own needs are valid. And so whenever I talk with parents or people working with young siblings, people maybe even in sib shops, facilitating sib shops, I think it's really helpful, instead of to necessarily like pat the kiddo on the shoulder and say, wow, you're such a great helper, like thumbs up, which is so often our tendency, right? But to leave it a little bit more open and to say something like, wow, I've noticed you help out with your siblings so much. What is that like for you? Right? Because that opens up this possibility that it's not just one thing. Like, it's not just awesome, thumbs up, you're a great kiddo. And it's also not like, that must be so hard and terrible and whatever. But it's, and ask it more than once, because like on any given day, it might be great and gratifying and amazing and wonderful, or it might be really hard and stinky and I don't like doing it. Like, and that might change from, hour to hour, just depending. We all, experience life in I feel like in little segments, right? So that caregiving can be a really, really important thing to note. And again, to just kind of be open to hearing about what that's like for the sibling. Let's look at the chat, because DJ, you had a really good comment. School was where I could feel that with my siblings, their embarrassment. Was it purposeful? Absolutely. But it was absolutely not, but it was present at times. For sure, DJ. And like, I love the fact that you, like, really understand that, like, kind of get under the hood, because was it purposeful? No. But the truth is, like, there's so much social pressure on kids. And I think especially these days, especially now with social media, I mean, that's another whole, like, discussion. But yeah, it can be, there can be a lot of pressure, I think, from other kiddos, especially school-age kids who aren't always the nicest, and who might ask questions in not the nicest of ways. And then DJ writes, my brother and I stayed alone together from 12 years old as well. Yeah, absolutely. That was kind of my generation too. I've read a lot about this too. I'm Gen X, and our parents, it's like, how are we even alive? Like, we would ride in the like back of the station wagon with no seatbelts, like lying down in the back. I mean, and we were latchkey kids too. So, but we all made it, people. It's okay. It's okay. Would I leave my children home alone? No, no. And then we all became helicopter parents. So I don't know what happened, but anyhow. So guilt. Let's talk about guilt. All right. This is like, talking about siblings without talking about guilt is like talking about the ocean without mentioning water. Okay, this is like such a natural. I don't want to say it's one and the same, but there are really a lot of reasons that siblings can feel guilty. First of all, survivor's guilt, as you might imagine, right? Like, why my sibling? Why not me? Like, my sibling's such a sweet kid. They don't deserve this. And it's so funny because we do sibling panels of the sibling with the diagnosis and without, right? And it's so funny that both siblings talk about guilt. The sibling without the disability saying like, oh, I just felt so guilty. Like, why didn't I have this? Why does my sibling have it? And then the sibling who does have the diagnosis talks about feeling guilty that so much family time and attention was wrapped up in them. And it's fascinating to see these conversations happen among siblings for the first time, because they're like, oh, I had no idea you felt guilty about that, right? And it's sort of like, look, we can all find, the moral of the story is guilt happens to all of us. We can all find reasons to feel guilty. Guilt over natural conflicts, right? We all fight with our siblings. Some might say it's our way of becoming prepared for life in the outside world, right? We learn about give and take. We learn about conflict resolution if we're lucky, right? But siblings can feel very, very guilty for these sort of typical conflicts, that siblings have with one another. And once they sort of calm down from whatever caused the conflict in the first place, very easy to sort of look in and say, gosh, like, I shouldn't have gotten mad at them. Like, it's not their fault. Yeah, Lindy, you have some experience with this one.
Well, I'm the youngest of 4 children, so there's a lot of experience. But apart from that, something that just strikes me over and over is, as we said, these these siblings, they come into sib shops as little adults, but these experiences, they're not prepared for it. They don't have life experience under their belt to help them process and understand it. As you said in one of the workshops, where they're just struggling to try to make sense of everything, but they don't have all of the pieces. And frankly, their cognitive function probably can't, fit it all together anyway. So just really looking overall at the experience of being handed these very, very adult situations that adults even struggle with, but they're children and tweens and teens and even 20-year-olds. It's incredible, but there's no other option. They have to learn how to deal and manage. They have to find a way through. So
Absolutely. And many do. I mean, it's funny, like it makes me think of actually something a parent said recently. She said, people say, how do you do it? And she said, but how do you not do it? Right? It's like something that we all, I think, have to live by. Like, how do you not do it? And in that case, validation is such an important and powerful tool for parents to really help not only guide the sibling through the process, but also like build their own confidence and self-efficacy, right? And validation, siblings want to be heard and validated, right? And validation of course, the good stuff, right? Celebration and validation of the good stuff, and also validation of the not so good stuff. That is what it is to be human, right? That is our human experience, that life is hard sometimes, and the world is not fair. And life for all of us is full of struggle. And if we can do that, if we can do life surrounded by people who validate us and our experiences, we are going to be a lot stronger and a lot, I think, a lot more confident and happier and maybe more at peace, because we have people who are not only pulling for us but acknowledging that we're doing it right. Like it's funny. I heard in a podcast not long ago, somebody said, at some point I realized that life was not hard because I was doing it wrong. Life is just hard, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so empowering, like, because it's so validating for all of us. So anyway, so guilt, we could just talk about again till the cows come home. So many reasons. Also, especially I think for younger siblings, that time when you might surpass, you in terms of social and developmental milestones, you might surpass the sibling in those things, that weird space when you become your older sister's older sister, right? That can cause a lot of guilt. So many things. Like we could do a whole, like, let's just come back another time and talk about guilt for an hour and a half. Like we could easily do that. Pressure to achieve, we've talked about this, these little perfect humans, these little, not only parents, but these kids who come to us, they get straight A's, they do lots of sports and activities, and they don't rock the boat, right? They have this pressure to achieve and to kind of be the good kid and not to add to the perceived burden of their that their parents are experiencing. We have a video on our website that features this little girl named Anya who talks about her family and coming to sib shops. And, she's a super sib. Like, she's just an amazing, articulate, wise, insightful little girl that really embodies, I think, this idea that siblings put a lot of pressure on themselves to achieve. And I think one of our greatest gifts for siblings can be to assure them that, first of all, they don't have to be perfect, because last time I checked, like, no one is. And if you figure out how to be perfect, like, let me know. Let's bottle it and sell it, and we will all be billionaires. It'll be amazing. But so perfection is not attainable, but it's also actually really okay to mess up. Like, it's okay if you get, a B or maybe even a C, or hey, you might even fail something. And you're going to bounce back from it, and we're going to love you just the same. And your value and your worth is not tied up in being perfect. I think that's a really, really important gift. Yeah, Lindy.
So something I loved in your workshop that I took a month, I don't know, recently, was this exact thing, and y'all talked so much about how that pressure to achieve is internal. It's not necessarily something that the parents are doing or society's doing, but it's this internal drive, like we've been talking about, trying to make sense of the situation. And a child's brain just goes to the conclusion, well, how can I help? I can be perfect. So, I'd love to hear when we get there, some ideas and ways about, well, we're talking about it right now. Just, you don't have to be perfect. You can get a B. It's okay. You can flunk. It's okay. So I guess the root of this all is conversation, huh, Emily? Just
For
talk to your
sure.
kids.
I think conversation and just honesty, and like us not being afraid to make a mistake. And when we do, to really own it and to model, grace and maybe humor, and to model what we want to see from our kids, and being able to accept that they made a mistake and forgive themselves, right? And not have that take a toll on their self-worth. I think that we can really model that well. Like, we use a lot of humor. I mean, I mess up at least, like, I don't know, 10 things every day, and, try to use humor and just be really honest about it with my kids. I think it's just such a great gift to give anyone, really, especially our young sibs. So. And then the last one I want to talk about is future concerns. And, I think for this particular group, right, for families of people living with Duchenne, because it is a life-limiting illness, those conversations about what the future might look like are really hard to have, because a lot of times we don't know, right? It's like we're living our lives just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop a lot of times. And especially siblings, if they don't have information about what's going on, they really don't know. Like, they really feel like anything could happen at any time, which is why, again, it's so important to really talk about and share information. But future concerns in terms of, not only how long will my sibling live, and what is that whole piece of it going to look like, but as my sibling does get older, right, as that narrative continues and maybe needs change, or the ability of our parents like changes, what role are we going to play? And so it's really, really important. And Lindy, you've heard me say this. It's really important to talk early and often about the future in terms of like every transition point, right? So maybe it's in school, or hey, we're trying this new doctor, or whatever it is, to make sure that the sibling is part of that conversation, so that the future isn't this like big looming ominous thing that we don't know about, we don't talk about, right? It's just like the next thing, it's the next step, right? Future can be so I don't know, can be so ominous, right? DJ, do you have any thoughts on this? This is like, I think, a big topic, the future concerns. And also, sort of attached to this is, as we live our own lives as siblings and we start making decisions about maybe going away to college, or finding a significant other, and pursuing our own lives, what does that mean for our role in our family of origin, and like our ability to help out, and our ability to be there for our sibs and for our parents? Finding a partner like who can understand and be there with you on this journey, like that's a big undertaking for a lot of siblings. Like, not only to find someone who will adore my little quirks, but also the fact that, hey, like, a future with me means a future, maybe an uncertain future, as it pertains to my sibling and my family. Do you have experience with this one, Lindy?
Well, I just wanted to express gratitude. Y'all brought this up in the workshop, and it's something that never ever occurred to me that a sibling trying to find a significant other, that they have to accept the whole family. And it's even more so than just, if you don't have siblings with the disability, it's, I don't like your brother, but whatever. But it's so involved. It is such a family affair. And it never occurred to me that that could limit partner options as well. So just want to say thanks for taking time to highlight that.
Absolutely. And DJ writes in the chat, yes, my future is still very uncertain with my mom beginning to struggle to care for me. That conversation still hasn't happened. Yeah, I mean, it's so common. And DJ, I'm just really curious to know from your perspective, like what thoughts and feelings come up for you, like being part of this scenario in which you recognize, that your mom's limitations are changing. My brother and sister also have their own lives, and I feel guilt that they may have to give up their dreams for me. Absolutely. And like when we do future planning workshops with families, and when we do that, I think the biggest hurdle is that first conversation. Um, and we talk about the dream and the nightmare, like what's the dream for everyone, so for DJ, for your siblings, for your mom, and then what's the nightmare, and how do we work towards that dream and away from that nightmare for everyone. And it just makes me think, DJ, like what your siblings could be experiencing. Maybe they have no idea that you're feeling that way, and I don't know, it sounds like maybe you haven't had conversations with them either about, well, what does come to mind when they think about the future, and what are some options that maybe don't necessitate anyone giving anything up necessarily, right? But like compromise. So I'll wait just a minute to see if DJ, you have any other thoughts. But I also would love to hear, is anything coming through, like through Facebook for questions, or no? Quiet crowd today. Quiet crowd. All right. So should we then flip the switch and talk about opportunities? Should we talk about the good stuff? Yeah, let's do it. And DJ just finished up the last conversation. I would agree those discussions do need to happen for sure. Yes, yes. All right, so the same way that parents tell us that, maybe having a child with Duchenne wasn't plan A, but you know what? Now that you are part of this club that you never even knew you wanted to be part of, there have been some silver linings, right? Some hard-won silver linings. The experience is really very similar for siblings, right? That along with the unique concerns, there are definitely good things that come their way as a result of being a sibling. These are just a few things that siblings talk about, and that we recognize that siblings experience. Tolerance, right? Gosh, if the rest of the world could be as tolerant as most siblings are, it would be such a different place, I think. But this idea that, for siblings, you've heard me say this, diversity training begins 365 days a year before breakfast, right? Like, siblings know what it's like to live with someone who's considered quote unquote different by society, right? And siblings are, I think, pretty apt to recognize that, wow, society doesn't always make room for difference the way it should, unfortunately. And siblings have too often seen the consequences of prejudice and don't like that, and tend to be very adept at not only making room for difference, but really meeting people where they are, and recognizing people for their also strengths and abilities, right? Advocacy, siblings are natural born advocates, both formally and informally. So a lot of siblings may find themselves working maybe at an organization or an association that supports and advocates for people who have the same diagnosis as their sibling, but also in those informal ways. Siblings are often like the person who, if there's a new kid at school, sitting by themselves at lunch, the sibling is the person who tends to go over and sit with them, right? Or maybe that new kid's being teased at recess, and maybe the sibling goes over and says, "Hey, do you want to play with me instead?" Right? Removes them from that situation. Siblings tend to be very just sort of naturally predisposed to advocating for and with kind of anyone they see as being slighted. Um, Insight, maturity, right? The idea that life has many facets, and that I think of insight as almost being wisdom, right? That the human experience, the human condition, what it means to be a human being, is a lot of different things. Even our youngest siblings in sib shops talk about what does it mean to be a friend, right? Is a friend someone who teases people with disabilities, even if it's not your sib? Well, probably not. We talk about the litmus test in the sib community, right? That depending on how our friends or maybe potential partners respond to our siblings, it tells us a lot about who they are and whether or not we want to keep them in our lives, right? So our siblings are kind of a litmus test for who we want to let into our circle. Maturity, again, is kind of I think of that as sort of the flip side of all that increased responsibility. As a result, you develop a maturity often, that is different from that of your peers. Humor, Lindy, I know you'll agree with me that many of us who have family members with disabilities or maybe a health condition, we tend to have a unique sense of humor, right? Like maybe a little twisted. DJ, you might agree with me on this one.
Yeah, you're putting it in a very nice way, Emily. Dark. It's just a dark sense of humor. It's just weird.
It's called coping, right?
It is.
Coping. And we know that laughter is really good for us, right? The research tells us laughter is good for our health, our social contacts and connections. DJ says absolutely. Yes. Yes. This is, humor is a big part of how many of us sort of approach the world and cope. Vocation, a lot of us find our way into helping professions, kind of if it's not necessarily advocacy, maybe a lot of us become like teachers or work somewhere in the field. I know a doctor in Connecticut who has a brother with spina bifida, and he said that the reason he became a doctor was because he and his dad brought his doctor to the emergency room one day. And I won't repeat what the attending doctor said, but he said something really negative about people with disabilities. And he said, from that point on, I vowed to become a doctor and to treat all of my patients with kindness and respect. And he has, in fact, gone on to do that. I get goosebumps when I hear that story. And he's just an amazing human being. Pride, as much as our relationships with our siblings might look different, we tend to take tremendous pride in those relationships and in each other's accomplishments. Inspiration, many of us are inspired by the grit and resilience that is demonstrated by our siblings who go out into the world every day, into a world that isn't always so accepting of people who are considered to be different. That can be very, very inspiring. I almost hate to talk about inspiration because there are those who take it to really an extreme, to the point where it's almost belittling, right? To be so inspired by our siblings or people with disabilities in general, sort of not recognizing that, well, we're just people kind of living our lives. We're just people doing our best every day to put one foot in front of the other, figuratively, just like everyone else. So, but still, when I think about, again, the resilience and grit modeled by so many individuals who are not treated the way they need to be treated by society, I think that's pretty impressive. Appreciation for our families, and loyalty. We're not perfect, but we have each other, and we've been through a lot together. Maybe a lot more than some of our friends, families can even think about, right? And look at what we've been able to face together, and look at who we are as a family as a result of just having each other's backs, right? And just having that unconditional love for one another. So those, I think, are the opportunities. Before we launch into our last little section here on how to, I have 7 tips for everyone, 7 tips on how to minimize those concerns and maximize those opportunities. Is there anything that anyone, Lindy, DJ, anyone else out there want to share about the opportunities and concerns?
Um, Gosh, my personal experience with my little one is just so limited right now. But I can see, so we homeschool. It's fairly common in the Duchenne community because there's so much for juggling. But I can see how her opportunities are, would you want to say, shaped or limited by the driving factor, which is our son's care, our son's daily medical needs. Right now, she's a tag along, but hopefully, learning more from you and developing our own parenting skills, we can help her create an identity apart from just being a sibling of an individual with a disability. But even just time is limited. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely. That's such a great segue, actually, to the next few slides. Unless, let's see, we have um, something in the chat. I would agree with that. Oh, I love this. Thank you for sharing this. I would agree with that. No matter what is going on when I need them, they will still drop absolutely everything and be here for me. That is so beautiful, DJ. I know we can't see you anymore. You escaped for a minute, but hopefully you'll be back. But that I just love that. It's like such a beautiful. There you are. Such a beautiful articulation of the last couple of points we talked about. Thanks for sharing that. Let's bring it all together. Should we do that? And then we'll wrap it up. I want to give people a few tips on how to minimize the challenges and maximize the good stuff, okay? First is to provide siblings with age-appropriate information from a variety of resources. So written resources, for sure. I'm a big fan of conversations and making sure that siblings have access to professionals. Remember, we talked earlier about how parents have access to professionals. Talk to your providers and find out, can they make a little time to answer questions that the sibling might have. Most professionals, even though they don't really put this on their job description, they are more than happy to do this if you just ask, and you definitely have every right to ask. Yeah, Lindy.
I love this. I love this part because I have been doing research and trying to, get more information into our household for my daughter. And we have got some amazing resources like kid books about Duchenne within our community that Duchenne parents have written. There's even one about being a sibling of Duchenne. There's only one that I have found, but it exists. And, we have a counselor who comes on and talks to the community as well. And she's going to be working on how to have toys in the household to help the siblings kind of work through and play and process some of these things that they're experiencing. And even just having common stuff in the house like Lego wheelchairs. I was so excited when I found out that Lego has wheelchairs. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Let's get a bunch. So yeah, I think those, just having toys around are a great way to start those conversations.
For sure. I'm so impressed that you found the book, and I am so excited about Lego wheelchairs. Like, yeah, I don't know, you're gonna have to put something in the chat. You're gonna have to put a link in the chat or something.
Sure, there's like a whole Facebook page that was created by a DMD parent about inclusivity through Legos, and they've got everything there. And we also have on the Family Friends and Duchenne website, we've got a page with all of these resources. I'll pop that into.
I love it. All right, number 2, provide siblings with opportunity to meet other siblings of kids with Duchenne. Again, you know, in my dream world, there will be sib shops just for kids who have siblings with Duchenne. We're working on it. Lindy and I are talking. We're working on it. But, you know, sib shops aren't the only way. If you have, you know, maybe a fundraiser or like a holiday gathering or you know some kind of initiative or event, like why not carve out some space for the siblings to get together maybe as a team or to do an activity together. If you are maybe hosting a play date for your kiddos with Duchenne, like why not see if siblings, are there any siblings that might tag along and meet each other as well? There is a book, apparently, right, that Lindy found that maybe, I don't know if they're a little, we need a kid's book, okay? We need a children's book written by someone who has experience with Duchenne and who can, like, introduce siblings, young siblings, to other kids, characters, right? Maybe in a book. It's such a powerful way to connect kids. Are you working on that right now, Lindy?
Oh gosh, no. Don't give me something else to do. It's a fantastic idea, and I actually have somebody in mind. I'll outsource that project. But I was going to say, we've got fantastic annual conferences, Cure Duchenne, Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and they always have a section for the SIBs. And it's fantastic. So if you go in person, they've got them. And I think even with the online conferences recently, they've got some SIB things. So awesome resources there.
I love that. Well, maybe at one of those conferences we can do a SIB shop in person. How fun would that be? All right, number 3, encourage good communication with typically developing children. Lindy knows I'm a big fan of active listening, which is really about validation, right? When we talk about good communication, active listening is one of the best ways that we can really let siblings know that we hear them, that we are validating what they say. And, you know, there's a book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's on our resource page on our website, siblingsupport.org. And it's like a crash course in active listening. And it's so great because it talks about the power of nonverbal cues, like making eye contact and, you know, making sure you're at the same eye level with a child who might be talking with you, and nodding, right? Like all these nonverbal cues we can give to like let the kiddo know that we're listening, but also verbal cues, right? Like, oh, that is so interesting. Like, tell me more about that. Oh, you don't say. Wow, that sounds like it might have been scary, fun, easy, whatever, fill in the blank. But to really kind of let the child know that we are taking in what they say by sort of the way we are responding and sending it back out there to them. And, you know, we see this in SIB shops all the time, that a lot of times, like, children don't need us to provide them with answers or solutions, right? But they need the time and space for us to be able to validate what they think and say so that they can come to that conclusion themselves. Like, they already have that within them. They just need help sort of getting it out, right? So active listening is a great tool. Encourage parents to set aside special time. This is the hardest one because we're all so busy. We've got so much on our plates. But as Lindy knows, what I am going to say is that with siblings, a little goes a long way. And so if you can carve out time in your day, maybe, you know, examples are, you know, in a panel not so long ago, one of the siblings said, yeah, growing up, my parents let me stay up an extra 20 minutes every night after they put my sib to bed. And it was just our time to do a puzzle or to talk or to maybe watch part of a show. Um, Other options, maybe one sibling said, I used to tag along to therapy for my sib twice a week, 50 minutes. I got to sit in the car and listen to a podcast with mom, or we would talk or listen to music or whatever, but it was my special time. Other sibs talk about, running errands with one parent, right? Like going shopping with dad on grocery shopping on Saturday morning. So even if we can turn these kind of mundane errands that we do into like special one-on-one time, it can go such a long way. And then I'll always share, we had a journal growing up, right? And my mom and I would write notes back and forth to each other in this journal. I know your little girl's only 4, but she'll get there. She'll be able to read and write soon enough. And, it might just be like, oh, I had a terrible day today, so-and-so, whatever. Or, oh, I had a math quiz and I don't think it went so well. And it was a chance for us just to communicate with each other when we had a few minutes to just like jot something down. There was no deadline. It wasn't like due on Tuesday at whatever, 5 p.m. It was like just, back and forth. It was a really nice way to let that person know that you were thinking about them, or that you wanted to communicate something without necessarily having the time to sit down right then and there, right? So lots of ideas there. Learn more about life as a sibling. There's so many great books and movies out there. We are going to have an adult sibling panel in a couple of weeks. That is going to be another opportunity I hope you all can make it, to learn more about life as a sibling. Encourage parents. You parents, please reassure your children by making plans for the future. And again, for so many of us, that future is a big question mark, and we just don't know. And so by framing it as a process that is ongoing and flexible and fluid, and something we do together in little steps, little baby steps, right? Future planning might be like, what are we going to do for summer care, or what are we going to do for homeschooling next year, right? But to include siblings in these conversations about the next step, that is a really, I think, manageable way to introduce this idea of planning for the future, and to make sure that everyone has a part in it. And I say this too, siblings tend to know their siblings in ways that parents don't. Like DJ, I'm sure I would guess you would agree with this statement that you and your siblings know each other in ways that your parents don't know you, right? Just by nature of being peers. I think, yes, absolutely. Thank you for validating that. It's true. My brother and I know each other in ways that, that are unique because we are peers. We're contemporaries. And so we have a lot of input and valuable insight when it comes to planning for the future. Like, we understand each other's strengths and abilities in ways that parents might not see. Who better to have a kiddo in a planning meeting for school, for example, a kiddo who can say, well, she doesn't talk, but she can draw pictures to express herself, or she communicates this way, right? Like, siblings have that insight, and it's a really valuable perspective to consider when we're talking about making plans for the future. And then last but not least, the most important, no, it's not the most important, but it is very important to remember that the single strongest factor affecting a sibling's interpretation of disability or a diagnosis will be your interpretation as parents. And Liddy, something you said at the beginning, like, really made me think about this, that, particularly when it comes to the future and this knowledge that at some point, right, at some point, we're going to have to say goodbye. And so how we cope with that as parents is so important in how we model how our other children can cope with it. And that doesn't mean always putting on a brave front and sort of, brushing that not so nice stuff under the rug, right? But sometimes it means being really honest and vulnerable and human, and knowing that we are maybe going to have days that aren't so good, but we're going to do it together, and it's okay. We're not going to be perfect. but we're going to enjoy every possible moment that we can, and and do that together, right? That's, I think, such a powerful message.
And so much of this is all just tied together. But if the crux of this is the parent setting the tone, then I would say the crux of the parent setting the tone is their mental health. And that's a big thing that we talk about in Family, Friends, and Duchenne, and we're going to have some more webinars coming up about that. But yeah, it strikes me the more I kind of dig into this, how parent mental health kind of pervades everything, and how it's important not only, to make good medical decisions and to have a functional marriage, but to have a happy family, the entire family. I know we're at the end here, and I'm so grateful that you have spent, oh my goodness, so much time of your Saturday with us. I'm going to open a can of worms, and as a teaser, and hopefully that's something we can tackle during our DMD sibling panel coming up on November 5th. And the can of worms is, and we've already opened quite a few. We will do several follow-ups, Emily. Keep picking your brain.
Open the can.
Yeah, let's do it. Is it possible for a sibling to create an identity apart from this family that is affected so deeply by a disability? Is it possible for them to find their own self-efficacy, their own self-determination, their own identity apart? And is it even something that sibling might want? So that's a doozy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that we're kind of closing with this idea, because the answer is yes, absolutely. And um, a lot of the challenges that we see, especially in our SibNet group, so the older siblings, are struggles with having this identity outside of their role as a caregiver, and sort of struggling with the guilt of that, and um, and struggling with this idea of self-determination. Like, can I have a life outside of being a sibling? Um, and the answer is absolutely, and yes. And if you read, we have a paper called "What Siblings Want Parents and Service Providers to Know," and that you can download that at no cost on our website. And one of the first things siblings say, this was a collection of sort of nuggets of wisdom from siblings all across the country, and by and large, like, that was the first one, like the right to one's own life. And I'll just share with you personally, growing up, my parents were always encouraging me to pursue whatever it was I was interested in, whether it was sports or, theater or music or whatever it was, and to have jobs, and to dream big in terms of going away to school and later to study abroad, and to really live a full life, and to not worry about being my brother's keeper necessarily. And the fact that they encouraged me so much to do that, I think gave me the I don't know what the word is, gave me maybe the encouragement to come back to wanting to play a role in my brother's life, not out of guilt, but out of feeling that I had a very full life, and that he's part of that, right? And that for me, it was a way of, like, how do I integrate all of these things? Which is not to say that I don't ever feel guilty, like, by any means. Like, let's not get it twisted. But having that latitude and having that freedom enabled me to figure out who I am and what I wanted my life to be about. And then I had something to factor Peter into, right? So it wasn't so much feeling that I was living my life for him, but that now I could live my life with him, because I had built this life, and to figure out what that looks like for us.
It sounds like maybe you're saying that the support your parents gave you allowed you to have a choice. That choice to participate in your brother's life was much more meaningful for you in the long run than being kept in that role always.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it maybe is counterintuitive, right, for
Yeah.
parents, like, no, we, right, like, but because they were like, go out, spread your wings, live your life, I could figure out what that life was about, and then wanted to figure out how my brother fit into that. So, DJ writes, for my family, my siblings weren't really able to find themselves till we were all adults, which did delay some things for them. Absolutely. And gosh, DJ, I hope you all participate in the panel in a couple of weeks. Keep working on them. We want to we want to hear their experiences. But yeah, absolutely. And that's a pretty common theme. So, yeah. So yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lindy and DJ. You are my unexpected um, almost like co-presenter here. So thank you for that. I appreciate both of your perspectives, and I hope this was helpful for folks, and I hope that people consider coming to our adult sibling panel, because it's honestly the most powerful way I think that we can really learn about sibling experiences.
Yes, and thank you, Emily, for all of your time and expertise and honesty and just, sharing your personal and professional experiences. I know this is so valuable for our community. I know there are so many parents struggling with this, and I'm so incredibly grateful to be able to help with some direction. And yes, DJ's little conclusion was a great teaser for our November 5 sibling panel. And we've had many in the DMD community before. I personally have not ever seen some with the individual with Duchenne and their sibling. So it's mainly just been siblings by themselves. So I'm really looking forward to that interplay. And we hope to have different age groups and different generations. So we're excited. All right, Emily, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much. You too, and we'll see you on the 5th.
It's a plan.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.